Hi, good evening, everybody. This is Dr. Amar Shah. I'm a neonatal and pediatric surgeon practicing at Amardeep Multi-Speciality Children's Hospital in Ahmedabad. And we'll be talking today on congenital lung lesions. So congenital lung lesions are usually detected in the neonatal period or in early infancy. However, some may be picked up in later childhood or even in adulthood. The diagnosis of congenital lung lesions may sometimes be confusing, but nowadays, with the advancement of good ultrasound, these lesions are detected more frequently during the prenatal period. So let's look at the embryology of how the lungs develop. It's basically a five-staged process. The first is the embryonal phase, which is between 3 to 5 weeks, where there is formation of the lobar bronchi. Then comes the pseudogranular phase, where there is development of all the bronchioles. This is followed by the canalicular phase between 16 and 24 weeks, where the epithelium differentiates and distal acinar development starts. The saccular phase is between 24 and 36 weeks, where the alveoli and the terminal sacs develop. And finally, the alveolar maturation goes on after the phase of 36 weeks of antenatal life. So the congenital lung lesions can be classified broadly into three main parts. First is the bronchopulmonary or lung bud anomalies. The second is the lung and vascular anomalies. And the third is just the simple vascular anomalies. Now, most of the congenital lung lesions fall in the first part, that is the bronchopulmonary anomalies, and we'll be discussing that in details. So the bronchopulmonary anomalies are the following. First, congenital bronchial atresia, congenital lobar emphysema, congenital cystadenomatoid malformations, bronchogenic cysts, tracheal bronchus, accessory cardiac bronchus, tracheomalacia, tracheal stenosis, and pulmonary underdevelopment. Let's talk a few slides about each of these pathologies. Now, congenital bronchial atresia. This is the focal obliteration of the proximal segmental or subsegmental bronchus. It mostly affects the segmental bronchi near the origin. There is no communication with the central airways. The distal structures are normally developed, and the bronchi distal to the stenosis get filled with mucus, hence forming what is called a bronchocele. Now, this may also be postnatal. It's not that it's always congenital. It may be postnatal because of either trauma or a post-inflammatory process. 50% of cases of congenital bronchial atresia are asymptomatic, and it may be an incidental finding which is seen in young adults. It may cause symptoms of either dyspnea or pneumonitis, and that is when they sometimes get picked up in later life. Let's see the workup. I mean, the X-ray chest, as is with all common lung lesions, the X-ray chest shows the formation of a bronchocele, which is a rounded branching opacities which are radiating from the hilum. However, the X-rays are sometimes not very suggestive, and hence a contrast CT scan is used to arrive at a confirmatory diagnosis. The CT scan shows a round opacity at the site of the atresia, which is medial to where the air trapping occurs. The treatment is lobar resection or segmentectomy, but it is done only if the patient is symptomatic. These are the X-rays of congenital bronchial atresia. You can see here that's the bronchocele, and the CT scan which also shows the similar picture. Now let's come to the next common problem, which is congenital lobar emphysema. This is most frequently encountered problem in all the congenital lung malformations. It is almost 50% of all congenital lung malformations. It is a progressive overdistension of a lobe. The air trapping which is seen in congenital lobar emphysema may be due to the dysplastic bronchial cartilages which create a ball valve effect. It may be caused by endobronchial obstruction from inspissated mucus or extensive mucosal proliferation. It may be caused by extrinsic bronchial compression from an aberrant cardiopulmonary vasculature or enlarged cardiac chambers, or it may be even from diffuse bronchial abnormalities. Associated cardiovascular defects in congenital lobar emphysema are up to 15%. Most of the patients are symptomatic in their first 6 months of life. However, a few that may be missed may present as an incidental finding, which may come across when an X-ray has been taken for any non-symptomatic reason. CLEs are most frequently seen in the left upper lobe. Almost 40 to 50% of CLEs are in the left upper lobe. Next is the right middle lobe, which is almost 30 to 40%. An X-ray chest is highly suggestive of the diagnosis of congenital lobar emphysema. X-ray chest shows an overinflated and hyperlucent lung on the affected side. This overinflation may cause tracheal or mediastinal shift. It may also cause the adjacent lobes to compress and hence create the atelectasis. A CT scan with contrast is the gold standard for diagnosis of CLE. It evaluates the anatomy, assesses adjacent or contralateral lobes, and also delineates any vascular compression if it may be the cause of the CLE. Radionuclear scan shows non-functional lobes. However, they are rarely used. This is the X-ray, which shows a right-sided hyperinflated lung, which is suggestive of a CLE. The CT scan again shows hyperinflated lobe, and this is the small compressed lobe, which is also seen. The compressed lobe, of course, is a normal lobe. When these children are operated, when the thoracotomy is done, invariably the hyperinflated lung pops out all of a sudden, no sooner the chest is open. This is the resected lobar specimen of the CLE. Coming next is congenital cyst adenomatous malformations. These are uncommon cause of respiratory distress in neonates and infants. It's caused by overgrowth of the bronchioles with almost complete suppression of the alveolar development. The communication between the individual cysts within the cecum and tracheobronchial tree may be present. Cecum occurs with equal frequency in the upper and the lower lobes. However, it is mostly unilobular. Now, there are three types of cecums which have been classified. The type 1, which is the most frequent, almost 70% of the cases are the macrocystic variety, in which there are one or more cysts which are more than 2 centimeters in diameter. They are surrounded by multiple smaller cysts and lined by ciliated columnar epithelium. The type 2, which comprises about 15 to 20%, are cysts which are less than 2 centimeters in diameter. They are lined by cuboidal or columnar epithelium. And in this type, associated renal or cardiac malformations may be frequently seen. The type 3 are the microcystic, in which the cysts are less than 0.5 centimeter in diameter. They are lined by cuboidal epithelium, and however, they are rarely seen postnatally and are associated with a poor prognosis. These are the different X-rays of lesions showing a cyst adenomatous malformation. This is a large cyst adenomatous malformation. A CT scan showing the multiple cysts. So when we come to the management of cecum is controversial in asymptomatic cases, as in, do they need to be operated? And if they do, when do they need to be operated? We won't go into those controversies at the moment. Surgery is definitely required for symptomatic neonates and in older children who present with complications like recurrent pneumonia. The risks of cecum may be infection and malignancy. This is the clinical image showing a thoracotomy where there was a large macrocystic lesion. This was a cecum. Again, this is another view of the same patient. So then we come to bronchogenic cysts. The bronchogenic cysts originate in abnormal diverticuli of the lung bud. They are usually extrapulmonary and are located in close proximity with the left main stem bronchus or the carina. In fact, bronchogenic cysts comprise of almost 30 to 60% of all mediastinal cysts. They may be intraparenchymal as well, and they may be caused by abnormal budding in the distal tracheobronchial tree. This cyst wall contains all the elements of a normal bronchus. It may be present as an incidental finding on an X-ray chest, which may be taken for an unrelated problem. They may sometimes present with respiratory distress or as infected cysts. Complications may be infection, hemorrhage, or erosion into the adjacent structures. Malignancy, although rare, has been reported in bronchogenic cysts. X-ray again is diagnostic in almost 75% of cases of bronchogenic cysts. CT scan is helpful in that it defines the exact site and the extent of the cyst. And the important finding on a CT scan is that the CT does not enhance, that the cyst does not enhance following contrast administration. Treatment of bronchogenic cyst is surgical excision regardless of the age at the presentation, and many a times this can also be done by minimally invasive surgery or video-assisted thoracoscopic surgery. This is the X-ray showing a bronchogenic cyst on the left behind the heart. This is the CT scan, which also nicely shows the bronchogenic cyst. So now we come to a rare problem, which is tracheal bronchus. These are bronchial anomalies which arise in the trachea or in the main bronchus. It's usually located on the right lateral tracheal wall, less than 2 centimeters above the carina. It may involve the entire upper lobe or its apical segment. Most of these patients are asymptomatic. However, they may have symptoms of recurrent upper lobe pneumonia or atelectasis. The diagnosis is confirmed by a CT scan or bronchoscopy. Treatment is mostly conservative unless and until the patient becomes symptomatic, where excision of the involved segment may be required. Tracheomalacia is another congenital lung defect where there is softening of the tracheal wall due to cartilaginous abnormalities of the trachea. It is caused mainly secondary to either a tracheostomy, esophageal atresia, tracheoesophageal fistula, secondary to chronic inflammation like cystic fibrosis or recurrent aspirations, extrinsic compression due to vascular rings, slings or aberrant vessels, and of course, tumors. The symptoms is predominantly an expiratory wheeze. Workup can be done by either a fluoroscopy or a CT scan. Fluoroscopy shows exaggerated reduction in the sagittal width of the trachea during expiration. CT scan assesses the cross-sectional anatomy of the trachea. Most of the cases of tracheomalacia do not require any form of treatment, and the symptoms reduce as the child grows. However, in symptomatic patients, treatment of the cause, if it is a primary cause, may be required. Sometimes children may require stenting or even an aortopexy. Tracheal stenosis. Congenital tracheal stenosis due to complete cartilaginous rings is rare. 50% of tracheal stenosis may be focal, 30% may be generalized, and 20% may be funnel shaped. 90% of children with tracheal stenosis present in the first year of life with biphasic stridor. CT scan and MRI with angiography and bronchoscopy are diagnostic for the evaluation of tracheal stenosis. Treatment can be offered depending upon how symptomatic the child is. The different treatment options include a cartilage graft, endoscopic dilatation, reconstruction, resection of the stenotic tracheal segment, or a tracheoplasty. Now we come to the last problem of the first group, which is pulmonary underdevelopment. Now, pulmonary underdevelopment may be of 3 types. One is agenesis of the lung, aplasia of the lung, or hypoplasia of the lung. Now, in pulmonary agenesis, the bronchus and the lung are both absent. In pulmonary aplasia, a rudimentary bronchus is present without any lung. In pulmonary hypoplasia, there is bronchial hypoplasia with variable reduction in the lung tissue. Now, pulmonary agenesis has associated congenital abnormalities as high as 50%. And this may involve other systems like the cardiovascular system, GI, GU, or even the skeletal systems. An X-ray is diagnostic for pulmonary agenesis or pulmonary aplasia. X-ray normally shows a diffuse opacification of the involved hemithorax with ipsilateral mediastinal shift. CT scan confirms the absence of lung parenchyma, bronchus, and the pulmonary artery on the affected site. Imaging in pulmonary aplasia is similar to pulmonary agenesis, except for the presence of a short-ending bronchus. This is the X-ray which shows a pulmonary agenesis on the right side and a CT scan which confirms the finding on the X-ray. Pulmonary hypoplasia may be picked up on antenatal imaging. The thoracic circumference in these babies is below the 5th percentile for the gestational age. A few ratios are also important to establish the diagnosis. A chest to trunk length ratio of less than 0.3 and a femur length to the abdominal circumference ratio of less than 0.16 is indicative of a pulmonary hypoplasia. Primary pulmonary hypoplasia does not have any particular definitive cause. It, however, is rarely seen. However, secondary pulmonary hypoplasia may be because of intrathoracic causes like diaphragmatic hernias or space occupying lesions, or extrathoracic causes like severe oligohydramnios, which may be seen in genitourinary abnormalities or even skeletal dysplasias. Congenital diaphragmatic hernia is a very important and common cause of pulmonary hypoplasia. It may be either a left posterolateral diaphragmatic hernia, which is the commonest. It may also be present on the right, and it may be bilateral. Anterior diaphragmatic hernias are Morgagni hernias, hiatus hernias, and as I told before, diaphragmatic hernias are commonly associated with pulmonary hypoplasia, especially the left posterolateral ones. Preoperative stabilization and control of persistent pulmonary hypertension is vital in cases of congenital diaphragmatic hernia for a successful surgical outcome. These are images. This is a case of a right diaphragmatic hernia. This is the classical left posterolateral diaphragmatic hernia. This is a child with bilateral diaphragmatic hernia. You can see here the diaphragmatic defect with the bowel on either side. And this is the Morgagni diaphragmatic hernia. So now we come to the second group of congenital lung lesions, which are lung and vascular abnormalities. Now these are divided into two parts. First is bronchopulmonary sequestration, which may be intralobar or extralobar. And the second is hypogenetic lung, which is also known as Scimitar syndrome. Pulmonary sequestration. This is most common. Here, a segment of the lung parenchyma receives its blood supply from the systemic circulation, which could be the abdominal or the thoracic aorta. This segment of lung parenchyma does not communicate with the tracheobronchial tree. It may be of two types, extralobar or intralobar. The extralobar variety is where the entire segment is separate of the native lung tissue, and it is also covered by its own pleura. It is seen in 25% of cases of pulmonary sequestration. The intralobar component, which is seen in almost 75%, is where the segment shares visceral pleural covering of the normal adjacent lung. Pulmonary sequestrations are commonly located in the posterobasal portion of the lower lobes. Now, extralobar pulmonary sequestration is usually diagnosed early. It may be an incidental pre or postnatal finding, which may be picked up on imaging. It may also be picked up on antenatal imaging where there is polyhydramnios or high output cardiac failure. Associated congenital abnormalities are high in cases of extralobar pulmonary sequestration, almost to the incidence of 50%. The associated congenital abnormalities which are present could be congenital diaphragmatic hernia or cyst adenomatous malformations, etc. Infants normally present with symptoms of respiratory distress or feeding difficulties. On the other hand, intralobar pulmonary sequestration are usually diagnosed in late childhood or even in adulthood. It may be again an incidental finding which may be picked up on an X-ray for an unrelated cause, or the patient may have symptoms of recurrent pneumonia or even hemoptysis. Intralobar pulmonary sequestrations can also be nowadays diagnosed on a good prenatal ultrasound scan. It may be associated with neonatal cardiac failure, and unlike extralobar sequestrations, associated congenital abnormalities are quite less in cases of intralobar sequestration. The diagnosis is predominantly imaging, where feeding systemic vessels are seen. Ultrasound with color Doppler would be helpful in diagnosis. CT scan, as is there in most of the lung lesions, is diagnostic for identification of pulmonary sequestration as well. It will help identify the structure as well as the vascular supply. MR imaging may be sometimes helpful in identifying the feeding vessels. Treatment of pulmonary sequestration is surgery. Extralobar sequestration are resected, whereas intralobar sequestrations may require a segmentectomy or even a lobectomy. This is a CT scan where this is the abdominal aorta. This is the thoracic aorta, which goes then into the abdominal aorta, and there is this branch which is feeding a sequestration. You can see this is the angiogram, and here from the aorta, a vessel is seen which is feeding the sequestration. This is a nice clinical picture where you can see this feeding vessel from the aorta, which is going into the sequestration. This was basically a type of intralobar sequestration and hence needed a lobectomy. The next problem is hypogenetic lung or Scimitar syndrome. The features are lung hypoplasia. Here there is ipsilateral pulmonary artery hypoplasia. That is, the lower thoracic or abdominal aorta supplies the right lower lobe instead of the pulmonary artery. The pulmonary venous drainage is also abnormal in that it drains directly into the IVC. Infants generally present early when there is coexisting congenital heart disease, and they may have a high morbidity and a mortality. And these kids are more likely to develop pulmonary hypertension. Diagnosis is done by an X-ray chest. A CT scan and MRI help direct visualization of the anomalous vein. A conventional angiogram may also be sometimes required to delineate the vascular anatomy before surgical repair. Now we come to the last set of problems, which are isolated vascular anomalies. Now these are mainly four parts: absence of the main pulmonary artery, anomalous origin of the left pulmonary artery, anomalous pulmonary venous drainage, or pulmonary AV malformations. I'll be just discussing briefly about these because these fall in the domain of the cardiothoracic people. However, echocardiography is recommended to assess the cardiac anatomy and look for associated defects. A CT scan or MR angiography helps to accurately pick up the hilar anatomy and delineates the collateral vascular network. And the problems are then dealt, as I said, by the cardiologist or the cardiothoracic surgeons. So to conclude the talk, in cases of congenital lung lesions, only a few cases can be firmly diagnosed solely on clinical grounds. Imaging of the thorax and the abdomen should be obtained as soon as possible if you are suspecting a congenital lung lesion. Most of the congenital and developmental anomalies have characteristic imaging features, and they help to arrive at a proper and early diagnosis. Questions are there. I would be available on my email. Thank you.